British Spy Stories, Season 1. Spy or Traitor. Episode 3. The woman who Gabrielle has come to see in London is Marjorie Allardyce. Marjorie was an operations controller in MI6 on the day that Gabby started, and they soon became friends. Now, Marjorie is doing the same job, but in MI5. From her vantage point in the coffee shop opposite Thames House, Gabrielle can see the main doors and the two side doors used for access. At exactly 3:32 p.m, Marjorie emerges into the daylight from a 10-hour shift leading an operation in the north of England. Gabrielle waits, then gets up and follows Marjorie as she walks across Parliament Square and disappears into the entrance of Westminster Tube Station. The vast hallways and good sightlines of the station make it very easy to follow people. Gabrielle can see Marjorie all the way down the escalator to the lower level. They stand 30 feet apart on the Jubilee Line northbound platform. Gabrielle steps back behind a group of tourists for camouflage. The train arrives. Gabrielle waits for Marjorie to move, which she does, and Gabrielle takes the next car along from her target. They reach the daylight again as they step onto the street at St. John's Wood. Marjorie navigates the busy road junction and walks quickly towards the mansion flats that border the streets from here down to Abbey Road. Gabrielle speeds up and, as Marjorie turns into one block of flats, draws level with her friend. "Marjorie." The woman doesn't turn her head, but slows to a saunter. "I saw you, Gabby, back at Westminster. I thought you might have done. Can we talk? I thought I might hear from you. Your name has been buzzing around on the network today," says Marjorie. "What did you hear?" "That you've disappeared." "I have," she says. Marjorie takes a sidelong glance at Gabrielle, the first time she has looked at her. "You'd better come in," she says. A flock of pigeons bursts up in front of Stuart Palmer, and a cloud of flapping wings makes the only significant sound in the small square where he sits at a cafe table. It is rare for him to take any time off, but his boss had insisted on him taking some days' leave before the end of the year. He pushes back his blonde hair from his forehead and tries to relax. His face is kind and has an innocent air. Stuart surveys the view. A woman 20 feet in front of him is exploring her mobile phone with an intensity. She looks up at him, then back down. A man on another table is drinking some sort of yellow liquid from a tall glass. He is about 40, well-dressed, and looks nervous, as though he is waiting for someone. He picks up the glass and empties it, then collects his belongings and walks away to the far side of the square before disappearing up a side street. Stuart vaguely thinks that he recognized the man, but he can't place him. A small car arrives in the square and stops at the far side, next to tables to a restaurant where a solitary old man sits reading a newspaper. Stuart sees this, but inside his head he is thinking about what he'll do next on his day off. He does notice the rear door of the car open, though, and a man get out, dressed in an orange overall and a woolen scarf pulled up around his features. The man approaches the seated old man and, without ceremony, pulls a handgun from his pocket and fires at close range. The old man slumps over onto the table in front of him, and the newspaper, caught by the wind, rises up in the air above his head. The small car with the gunman back inside screeches away and disappears into the maze of connected streets around the square. Screams ring out from people all around Stuart. A man and a woman run over to the old man, who has slipped quietly to the ground. Stuart wants to rush to help, but he sits completely still, unable to move. He has never witnessed anything like this in his 37 years on the planet. His brain says move, but his body isn't listening. He can feel sweat on his skin and a pulse in his throat. At last, Stuart's leg moves, then the other. Now he's running. He runs to the nearest side street, then steams around the corner into a narrower street that slopes away to the main road 50 yards ahead. A man in a dark coat is coming the other way. Stuart steps to one side to avoid him, and the man steps the same way. Stuart steps the other way, so does the man. Stuart and the man are 2 feet away from each other now. The man brings his arm up. There's something in his hand. Stuart is in a panic, then feels something cold push into his skin, and the vision in his eyes darkens to blackness. Sir Stephen Lawton stops writing and looks up at the clock directly opposite his desk on the 3rd floor of MI6 headquarters. The building known as Vauxhall Cross sits on the south bank of the Thames, 15 minutes by chauffeur-driven Jaguar to the headquarters of MI5, which is nearer to Downing Street. His salt and pepper hair sits on the top of a tall, thin frame, and his body is hidden beneath a 3-piece suit that has echoes of times past within the security service. One of the 3 telephones buzzes in front of him on his large mahogany desk. He presses the flashing button on the base unit. "Stephen?" says Sir Bernard Mackintosh, Global Head of Operations for Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6.
"Hello, Sir Bernard."
"I've had a red flag reported to me from Control about Gabrielle Lane, Agent Blackhawk,"
says Sir Bernard.
"We've lost connection with her, temporarily, sir, but it should be back soon."
"What's she playing at, Stephen?"
"Fallout from the Stranraer loss, sir. She seems to have taken it upon herself to disappear."
"Have you got resources trying to find her?"
says Sir Bernard, getting mildly annoyed at Lawton's casualness.
"Top priority, sir."
"Has anyone spoken to her since the incident and understood what's going on in her mind?"
"As soon as we find her, we'll have a detailed chat, Sir Bernard," says Lawton. "Rest assured, we're putting everything into tracking her whereabouts."
"Keep me across it, Stephen. She's an excellent agent, and I don't want more losses in the field."
"Yes, sir."
The line goes dead. Lawton gets up and goes to his drinks cabinet between the 2 bay windows in his office. He pours a single malt whiskey and looks out across the running tide. He notices that his fingers are shaking on one hand. He puts his hand in his pocket. He can feel the hard plastic coating of the standard issue arsenic capsule that is to be carried on you at all times. You never know when you might be caught. Every day is a high wire act. All the people who you meet that you have to lie to. And Moscow has become increasingly demanding in the past few months. He's not sure how much more he can cope with. Something is happening inside MI6, Lawton can tell. It feels like an eyes-only operation is bubbling through the organization, but just not for his eyes. He has heard nothing, and that makes him wary. Lawton has been very careful to leave no trace of his leaks over the years, but that doesn't mean his luck might run out one day. He drinks the malt straight down and pours another. The nurse lifts Stuart's wrist and feels his pulse. Steady now after a few hours of touch and go. She lowers the limb back down onto the bed covers, turns to the intravenous drip and taps the outside of the casing. She makes the slightest glance towards the door and takes a syringe discreetly from her pocket. She removes the cap and injects a clear liquid into the intravenous tube before silently gliding out of the room and along the corridor. Palmer's breathing is steady. The lights on the monitors indicate his heartbeat and vital rhythms are within the acceptable range. The afternoon sun floods in through the window next to his bed, and the sounds of the hospital hum away in the background. The first sign that something is wrong is a silent flashing light on one of the monitors by his bedside. After another minute, an alarm blares out. 2 nurses come running in and check the monitors. One starts immediate resuscitation. The other goes to the corridor and calls for the duty doctor. Within 1 minute, a tall, dark woman in her 50s arrives and inspects Stuart. His breathing is shallow, and his body starts to convulse. He vomits and it stays in his mouth. They turn him. The doctor calls for drugs and a syringe. She pushes it into his right arm. The convulsions reduce, then stop. Stuart cries out in pain for a full second, and his body arches up off the mattress. Then he settles, and the alarms close off one by one as the monitors start to return back to normal levels. The doctor pulls out the patient records from the hanger at the end of the bed.
"What was it?" asks the nurse. "It doesn't make sense to me," says the doctor, reading the pages. "These results show all clear only an hour ago. Has anything been administered and not recorded?" "We've been at the nurse's station right outside all day," says the nurse. The doctor says nothing, but goes back to Stuart and looks at his face. "What are you all about, Herr Palmer?" she says under her breath. Marjorie puts her forefinger to her lips as they enter the flat. They make their way down a long corridor and into the conservatory of 17A, Carlisle Place. "You remember Gabrielle?" Lady Fiona Allardyce turns her aged head and peers at Gabrielle.
"Oh, yes. How are you, my dear?"
"Very well, thank you, your ladyship."
"Don't bother with all that. Call me Fiona."
"What have you been up to, mother?" says Marjorie.
"I was tracking some Chinese websites," says the old lady. "They're issuing statements apparently independent of the government. It's all bloody obviously coming from the Chinese security service. Think we were born yesterday."
"Mother was in MI5 30 years. Can't quite let it go," says Marjorie with a wistful smile. "What are they saying, Fiona?" says Gabby.
"Just reading off some names of individuals of interest to the authorities, making out they're trying to protect them," says the old lady. "I invented this technique in '68. We used it against the Soviets very effectively. Brought in a large number of their double agents that they were running in London. By appearing to be a pro-Soviet newspaper, they fell right into it."
"How do you find the sites?"
"Easy for me, my dear. The technical chap I know set up my computer with something that allows me to track all this. Easy nowadays, it's all on the internet, I must say. We had to set up special networks to capture it back in the day."
"There's something I need to find out, Fiona," says Gabby. "Could I use your computer for a couple of minutes?"
"Be my guest, my dear. Second door on the left, back towards the front door."
Gabrielle finds the study and sits in front of the computer. She pulls out a micro drive from her pocket and plugs it into the machine to isolate any tracking devices before she can do anything else. She needs to get into the Oberon system that MI6 use to record all of the operational detail. Tech branch will spot the activity within 60 seconds, so she has to get in and out before the alarms trigger. She sets a timer on her watch and logs in. She needs to know who was messaging who from the time Mac received his reporting instructions to the moment that he died. She runs a search against the criteria, and a huge volume of data is displayed on the screen, far too much to glean anything useful with a cursory glance. Gabby starts to download the file back onto her storage device. As the percentage moves along the progress bar, she checks her timer. 20 seconds. She needs to destroy all traces of her being on this machine before the alarm sounds. 10 seconds. The file completes its download. She logs out, runs the MI6 strike application, and wipes the machine clean. As the software completes, the alarm sounds on her wrist, and she breathes out.
"Thank you for the use of your computer, Fiona," she says as she returns to the conservatory.
"You're very welcome, my dear. I hope it helps you."
Marjorie cooks dinner, and towards the end of the meal, Fiona entertains them with stories that her daughter has heard many times before about the old days of British intelligence. Then, after Lady Allardyce goes off to check her horse racing results, the younger women talk on, and Gabby relates the events surrounding Mac's death.
"What are you going to do now, Gab?"
says Marjorie quietly.
"I need evidence. He was a good friend of mine. I just want to know what happened. That evidence is out there. I just have to find it and piece it together."
The time ticks on, and eventually Gabby looks at her watch and says,
"I need to go. I was never here, Marge. I don't want you and Fiona to get caught up in my mess."
"You can trust us, Gab,"
says Marjorie. They go to the front door, and Gabby walks down the stairs and pushes out into the dark. Inside the flat, Marjorie goes to the study and starts to file her contact report with London Centre, with an update on Gabby's latest state of mind.